can complement NBS is acceleration of removals. Alone NBS, it can't be done alone with NBS. CDR comes in to just accelerate the pace of removals. I think that's where I would cap it at in terms of how much you can scale this, and how much of the legacy emissions you can get rid of.
Great, thank you. I think we've heard a lot about the different technologies and opportunities for scaling carbon removals. But part of the reality is also, no matter how promising a solution sounds, it won't scale without the right financial and also supportive policies. And I would like to use the last 10 minutes to talk about this a bit more, because part of the truth is also that many of these technologies face high upfront costs, at times certain uncertain revenue streams, and also still regulatory gaps. Obviously, since it's a very new technology, this needs to be worked out. So I would like to ask you, Anastasia, what will it take to unlock investment and create the right policy environment to really drive this to the next stage, so to say?
From my opening remark, I still repeat, it takes collaboration. Okay. We all need to come to the table, because CDR generally is expensive. It's very capital intensive. And I'll give you an example with solar. So we are running a pilot project here in Kenya, and we have to drill a well. If you have an idea of drilling a geothermal well, you can see it's quite expensive. It's more than $2 million USD, just drilling a well. And you've not even put in the infrastructure for injection and, other things. So it's really expensive and capital intensive. And that is one of actually our challenge. This is something that is, for now, we funded by private equity. However, that's not sustainable. Going forward, we probably want to ask all the financiers, everybody to come to table and see. Now that you are able to show you that we can store the CO2 permanently underground, and maybe just to explain a bit what we are doing, maybe there are people who are not understanding when I say store it underground. So what we are doing, we are taking the CO2 that has been captured by the dark partners, we inject it into the ground, and not everywhere. So don't ask me why Nairobi, why we are where we are, because we have the right geology. So we inject it into basalt rock, and the rock has capabilities of mineralizing. So it releases some of the cations, and so it's a chemical reaction. It reacts with the CO2 and it forms carbonates which stay into the rock permanently. So that is what we mean when we say we are injecting CO2 permanently. So as you asked, financial difficulties and challenges are real, and you can see. However, we've been able to show that it's doable, and with as many partners as possible, everybody to come to table, I think we can be able to meet it. Now, in terms of policy, I think it's very important to have clear policies and regulations when it comes to carbon storage. There could be a gap. However, I think all players and stakeholders that are concerned on this, it's very, very important to sit down and come up with clear regulations. I think that's what I have to say. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Anastasia, also for the very good storage 101. That was very well explained. Billa, would you like to also come in and quickly address the question? It would be nice. Yeah.
Sure, thank you. Thank you, and thanks, Anastasia. I think very much, echoing exactly what she said, and going back to my earlier point that this is a very new industry. There's a lot of. It's not just a kind of thing where you say, let's put in a bit of money and then we'll see a company come. A few companies. There's a lot of ecosystem building work that needs to happen. So I'll give an example. We've been working quite closely with Sela and other people that are looking at durable carbon storage. But then you realize there's a lot of studies that haven't been done in the country. So we think there's a lot more potential in the country to store carbon. But it would be great if there are scientific studies that have been done and we could tell or map out the country a little bit better. So it's a kind of thing where if there were sort of either concessional funding or grants and collaboration, say, with universities or researchers to try and get some of these studies done, then it makes it a bit cheaper for the private sector or the private sector players to come in. So I think there is a lot of underlying research that needs to be done for us to really drive this industry. And the more that's being done outside of private money, the better. Or at least if we can sort of have different types of money coming together, then it makes it easier for private sector money to come in. Otherwise, it might take a while to have the right kinds of funding coming in. The other thing is also to note, but it's both a positive and negative, but at the moment, a lot of the funding is coming, from the global north, as it were. And I guess also just because of how climate financing has happened. But I think it's an interesting advantage is a lot of the buyers, especially in the voluntary markets, tend to be global north buyers. And there's a question around how do we, we're working with them and getting them, to know that Kenya is a really good place to do, permanent CDR, as it were. But I think there needs to be a lot more conversations to convince people that, you actually, because you do hear, people saying, oh, should you really be doing CDR in Africa? We need to be doing CDR somewhere else. I think there's something there that we need to keep telling this narrative that actually Kenya and East Africa is probably the best place to do CDR. And hopefully, so you're not actually seeing people saying, oh, we'd like to buy your credits, but we can't buy them because we don't quite believe in doing this in Africa, etc. So there's something there around where's the source of funding and how do we tell the right story. On the policy side, again, because it's such a new industry, there's always the questions around what, what policies are you really following, what regulations are required. And what we are seeing is, even for things like storage, etc., even across other jurisdictions, it's still such a new industry. But I guess there's a need to do a lot more collaboration around what's happening in the US, for example, what's happening in Iceland, what's happening in other places where this is being done, what regulations have they already put in place. Because I think we want to be quite balanced so that we don't want to kill an industry before it even starts. So how do you make sure that you're creating a regulatory environment that is giving people comfort to know, what, we can come and invest millions of dollars for the long term, and we won't have, regulatory changes, overnight. But on the flip side, you also don't want to overregulate something until people say, okay, we can't actually invest in the industry. So for me, I think it's actually imperative that we put in place the right type of regulation, one that allows for people to know what they're coming into and provide some level of comfort without necessarily killing the industry before it even starts.
Thank you, Belahar. Just to, I suggest before we go into Q&A, I would like to do one quick round, and maybe with just, if there's one thing that you can change, one policy or incentive, anything you can imagine, what would it be? And maybe starting at the back with Bella, very short.
It would be import taxes on machinery. I think that goes for all of us, as well as taxes on the credits themselves. I want to give a quick shout out to CMAC if there's anyone in the room from that group. The Kenya Carbon Market Association is doing some work on that.
For me, I would say get more financing. Concerted efforts from every player and stakeholder, and scaling up. Thank you.
Echoing what Bella said, I think, one, let's look at what it's costing us to import some of this machinery. Again, it's really, really industry. How do we make sure that we're incentivizing people to actually invest? And secondly, it's this idea of just having stable regulations, because I think that's really important. So whether it's what's our policy towards but tax, or what do you call it, revenue or taxes on carbon, or whatever else we're doing. So I think it's actually important that we have stable regulation that's not changing all the time.
Taxes on machinery. No, I'm joking, but I think I do echo that. But I think what I would do is encourage policymakers to realize that this is a really nascent industry. I think because by its very nature, with carbon credits, you are trading in like a global market. I do sometimes think there's an assumption we're slightly further ahead than we are, and I think some of the recent policy reflects that. So just bearing that in mind when thinking about taxes and all that sort of thing.
Well, I have a laundry list, but I think, allow me to just say two. I can see some few folks from the ministry here. I think integrate CDR into national policies. That's especially, for example, in the carbon regulations, there's, mixture of how you're defining emissions reductions and removals. These are two separate things. In the energy policy, we talk about CDR as emerging technologies, but no proper frameworks. I think for me, the one thing is integrate CDR into national policies and also in the whitelist that's coming out this week. Thanks.
Thank you. So, we're doing amazingly well on time. We still have 13 minutes and have some room for questions. So I would like to open up the floor. So if you have a question, just state your name, your organization, and then if you want to address the question to a certain panelist, or can go to the panel. And I see a first question over there.
Yes, my name is John Ayonjera Begumana. I've been working on a number of carbon projects in Uganda. My question about biochar to anybody is that the way it works is very simple to understand. Everyone, if you read literature on how biochar works and how you are actually keeping that carbon in the soil, it's very easy, everyone can understand it. The problem is the existing methodologies, maybe you have developed yours, seem to be based on a certain background, I don't know, Latin America or where, and it doesn't seem to be working for project developers in this part of the continent. If you have managed to solve that issue, then that's great. Thank you.
I can try and answer this. I mean, my feeling is that carbon in general, methodologies are reasonably inaccessible. Like, I do think they are quite complicated and they do require a level of expertise. I do think that's changing though. I think if you look at biochar right now, kind of like the legacy, if you can use that term, legacy players, people like Vera, who do have a biochar methodology, aren't really like leading the way. The same might even be said for Puro, because I think you even have easier to understand, easier to access methodologies coming through from the likes of, isometric or reverse. I think there will always be a level of expertise required, but I do think as the market develops, there are registries out there trying to make it a little bit more straightforward, which definitely helps me personally. So.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I would say that's a really big issue, especially with artisanal biochar production, not industrial. So industrial is something that Roy and I's companies work on. Artisanal, I think, will be talked about a lot tomorrow. Solidaridad, if they're in the room, is doing that in a couple of different countries. And it's a really big challenge, but there's networks that are working to try to increase knowledge exchange about this, and also show that so much of credits are being produced in the global south. If they're being bought by the global north, there should be access to laboratory standards in the Global South to meet those needs. And so, yeah, to all of the Global North standardization companies and organizations in the room, something to note, and happy to chat about that further. There's a couple of associations I work with in regard to that.
Yeah, thank you, Rory and Bella. I think, gentlemen in the back, please.
Hi, my name is Mwangi Gidiru. I work for a company that implements forest carbon projects, mostly trees, I must confess. I don't know that much about this, but I didn't hear any concerns that you guys may have around these methods. I would imagine that it's just even the finances part. I think the scalability that you talk about, it's a very expensive undertaking, obviously, and the scalability might be impeded by finances. But beyond that, are there any concerns that you have from the removal process that is not very consistent with what happens in nature, or the storage that you may want to discuss? Because there's no process that doesn't have their cons in my understanding.
Okay, I think I'll go first and I'll speak to the risks or challenges of maybe storage. And one of them, as I said, we are drilling a well, and we are drilling a deep well. So the very first challenge is actually with the drilling. For us, we are not looking for steam, but even getting a steam is not very nice for us beyond certain temperatures. And just like in geothermal, we drill wells which are 2 kilometers deep or more, 3 kilometers, but here we are only drilling like 1 kilometer deep. And maybe one of the risks that I would say is you would expect that once you inject the CO2, you may cause seismicity. That is actually the biggest that people think about. And I'll tell you from a background of geothermal, I've worked in the geothermal industry for 10 years. As long as you have good data, you have studied your field well, then that no longer starts becoming a problem because you monitor all those risks. So for us, what we are doing in Sala, our MRV is very, very strict, or per se to say. So immediately we inject, we run MRV and ensure that we do not have any CO2 that is coming back, which is unlikely, and that we are not inducing seismicity. So from a perspective of storage, I think that is what I would speak to, but then also give you confidence that that's something that shouldn't worry us so much, because as long as you're doing it well with the studies and the monitoring, then it's not something to worry about. We have had geothermal industry for the last 30 or so years, and not much has happened. Thank you.
So I'll speak to the question of costs, and you did raise an interesting, because that's usually the one thing about permanent CDR. The methodologies tend to be viewed, or actually a lot more expensive than, say, the nature-based ones. One, I think it's important to, going back to something that has been repeated, which is we need all sorts of CDR methodology. So whether it's nature-based, technology-based. And because of where we are with the problem right now from just how much carbon has been released into the air, I don't think we don't have the luxury of saying we can only go in one direction or the other. So that's one thing. And then secondly, from a country perspective, because we should see ourselves as providing the services that the world is looking for. So it's not costing Kenya much to do this. It's actually a really good opportunity for us because we have the energy, we have the talent, we have the biomass, etc. So for as long as the buyers in the Global North in particular are keen to buy a portfolio mix, so both of CDR, permanent CDR or durable CDR versus nature-based CDR, I think Kenya should be, or East Africa should be positioning itself to the point where we're saying, let's actually use everything to the best of our advantage. So if we have the land for nature-based stuff, let's do it. If we have the energy or the biomass for biochar and duck, let's definitely do it. And that, in a sense, allow the market to sort of say what it is that it's buying. And lastly, what we've seen is a lot of clients want to kind of have a mix in their portfolio that says, yes, we want to do nature-based stuff, but we also really value permanence, or we value durability. So can we have something that sort of gives us both? So I think we'll be shooting ourselves in the foot as a country if we don't advance all fronts, as it were.
Yeah.
First Fiona and then Bella.
Okay. I think looking at it from dark technological advancements or what we do in Octavia, I think for us, one of the biggest risks is in terms of time. It takes time to build these machines, to design these machines, to build them, to commission them, to test them. So, you know, and that means we have to invest also a lot of time ensuring that, you know, we have, you know, more than, you know, we've clocked in more than 100,000 hours of R&D to ensure that at every single stage, from the precursor chemicals to the actual fabrication, that everything works as it should. And time is our biggest problem. And, you know, when you take them to the site and you commission them and you test them around all these different environmental conditions and you say that you have to start again, at that point, then it becomes, that means, you know, you've invested a lot of time and money, and you have to start again if you're not getting to, you know, for example, 100% CO2 purity that, you know, our storage partners need. I think the other thing is also collaboration risk as well, if you can allow me to call it that. So in the world you have, as Rory has mentioned, these technologies are very nascent. So you have a handful of people in the world who are doing this. Fortunately, we have 10 CDR, more than 10 CDR companies in Kenya who are, you know, seeing that, you know, Kenya is the world's best place to do this. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation where you're trying to show the government and people that we have successful projects in the global north that are doing this. Please put policy forward. Please put policy forward, policies which are super positive that are going to ensure that we scale CDR to the fullest possible. But the thing the government is also asking, these technologies are not very mature, so it might not be worth the risk. So it's time risk and collaboration risk.
All right, Bella, please.
Okay, I'll make it quick.
Yeah.
I actually wanted to link your point to John's point as well, and say for biochar that not all biochars are made equal, and that there's some that are more beneficial to other applications than another one. So pH is a big factor of that. It affects the cation exchange capacity, nutrient availability. It totally is determined on what cropping type you need, and then that is where you want to apply biochar from that feedstock. And we have great standards for biochar that are really intense, but part of it is to keep the standard up. And that's for carbon durability and a bit for making sure that you're not, getting money to put in a material that has high polyaromatic hydrocarbons, which are bad, or heavy metals, which are also bad, into soils. But we don't have the same standards for what you are mixing with biochar to then make a sellable product. And so you can get KEBS certification in Kenya and whatever it is for regional countries, but that takes time, and there can always be loopholes in it. And so making sure that you have a high quality product of biochar and it's going to the right soils, not necessarily the primary purpose of carbon, but the primary purpose of serving farmers and having carbon removal be a secondary benefit, to make sure that it's not an extractive business model.
Thank you, Bella. And see no more question at this time, and we have 5 more minutes left. So I would like to ask all panelists for a 1 sentence, or let's say 1 minute, since we have 5 panelists and 5 minutes, 1 minute takeaway or call to action to close the panel. And I would like to start with you, Fiona.
Thank you. I'd like to close it off. It's all hands on deck kind of situation. And to our policymakers, our folks in government, we are putting these policies in place, when I'm putting regulations in place, let's not just look at one side of climate action or climate forward policies. Let's look at the industry as a whole to avoid a situation where we have to keep repeating the cycle, putting position papers out there. So let's include the whole industry as a whole and benchmark from best practices.
Thanks. I think we've talked a lot about the regulation around the carbon side of the business. I guess for me, one thing that I feel very strongly about with biochar is its amazing ability to also sort of build climate resilience and regenerate soil for climate vulnerable people here in Kenya. And I would just, encourage us when we think about CDR to also think about those co-benefits and the impact it can have, especially when we're thinking about policy and how to get these products to farmers.
So again, disagreeing with all my co-panelists at the moment, but I think just reiterating this idea that we are at the precipice of a potentially really big industry. So when you think about where permanent carbon removal is going globally, and we do have a chance to actually build a really big industry around that in East Africa. And so, again, all hands on deck to echo what Fiona has said, but I think if we begin to see that as a country and that becomes the modus operandi, then we'll actually begin to say, what does it take to get and build this industry? Whether it's the right policies, right financing, collaboration, scientific studies, whatever the case might be. But I think the more we can look at this and say, wait a minute, as a country or as a region, we have a chance to be at the forefront of what might end up being $1 trillion global industry. We don't get those, those are very few once in a lifetime or once in a generation type opportunities. I think we should all be coming on board and saying, how do we help this industry get off the ground?
For me, I want to say that we can do it. Let's move the conversation from the boardrooms. I think we have now seen that CDR can work. Let's test it. We learn by doing. Let's run these ideologies that we are having from our minds, from our boardrooms. Let's test them. Let's see how to iterate them and get the right solution that you're looking for. However, there is no one solution that is going to work, I can tell you for sure, unless we have concerted efforts with all the technologies of CDR. That is the way that we should move, and that's the way we'll be able to remove the CO2 from the atmosphere. So I would say that let's put our concerted efforts. Let's stop just talking, get into action. I think that's what I want to leave is, let's get into action. Let's do it, because we have seen it can be done, and we are willing to do. We have the technology. We in East Africa have, I think what it takes, all the resources that it takes. We just need support from all stakeholders, government, financiers. We have the talent we've had, and we have the know-how. So let's get all concerted efforts, and let's do it, because we can do it. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I think, I mirror what a lot of the panelists said, and I think we are a really good network here in East Africa. We know each other, we work with each other, we have networks and associations to do policy work, tax work, farmer outreach, and so look to this market and the expertise that's in the Global South, specifically in East Africa, as your partners. Reach out to us, talk to us. We have experience. We know what standards aren't working, what is really challenging. We know what standards do work. We know what other standards are needed. And we're really looking in how we can expand this to also create more carbon markets to be sold, traded. We all together have a lot of work to do in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you. Nothing to add, just to say thanks a lot for the great panel, and thanks a lot.